and our responses, particularly in the light of freshwater and carbon. And that's fantastic and essential, of course, but it's very easy to lose sight of a couple of things. One is that people need to be able to farm profitably, they need to be able to farm productively, and they need to be able to fit farm systems to the land and the climate and the people in a way that provides the best outcomes. And that is, and this is where I'm heading, that is a complex jigsaw puzzle. Right? It's not easy to kind of say how do we fit a farm system best to the land and everything else that goes around that. And it's very easy in today's world of sort of 20-second sound bites to look for what's the silver bullet. Oh, we just feed our cattle seaweed and we'll be right, or whatever else it might be. And we know that farm systems are complex, they have feedback loops, it's not that simple. And today we have some people in the room who have some fantastic experience and some learnings from working through farm systems in both a research and a practical way. So we're very excited to hear from those people. I'm going to invite Graham Ogle to come up now, and Graham's going to jump up and down during the day introducing people. I guess Graham has done a lot of work in recent weeks working with many of you, organising today, and on behalf of Rezare Systems, we're very grateful for that work as well. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you, Andrew. Rezare's been planning to run this workshop for quite some time, and it's a real pleasure to have a room full of all the people we want here for this workshop. What I want to do is just cover why we're running the workshop and a little bit about how. I think this is a chance for... Rezare's been looking for the chance to have a bit of a, and I found the word the other day, a policy refresh, a strategy refresh, sorry. Very cool word. And we thought, what better way is there to have a strategy refresh than invite all the right people, and we think you're all the right people, to a venue and talk about what we see as really valuable to farmers. What is value? What is value when we say, of all the things we can provide a farmer, what are the valuable things? I guess I started my career, my idea of that really was forged out of when I started my career in the 1980s, which meant that I had 2 decades of excruciatingly low product prices to work with for farmers. I remember sitting with a farmer one day, he was in trouble, the farm was going to get sold up, and I thought, if we get $35 a lamb, you'd be right. And of course, the markets weren't delivering that. Now, you can adjust that by whatever you like, whatever inflation index you like. The CPI would mean that farmers today would be getting $55 a lamb. And I imagine our budgeting would be even more difficult today given the increase in costs. Dairy farmers were getting $2.40 a kilo of milk solids. I mean, it's almost unheard of. And if we ramp that up by the CPI, we'd be talking about a payout today of $3.70. So this was a sort of the anvil that forged my early career, and going out to do things for farmers that were of value. The biggest value we could do for farmers then was increase their profitability, and that started to address all the other problems that were on the farm. So when Rezare set out, as we did in 2004, as a group dedicated to agricultural software development, often we sit around and think, is our strategy aligned with where the value is in the industry? Are we aligning our investment in resources where the value resides in the industry? So what we're going to do today is we're going to think, how might we align our investment with what top farmers are saying is important to them? And I can't think of any better way to start this workshop than listening to some top farmers. So that's what we're doing. I think consulting is also an extension of farming, and we'll listen to consultants after that. The farmers that we'll listen to have been through some process of change or intensive planning. And it's from those discussions that we hope you'll pick up some things about what they value. And maybe a successful outcome of this workshop is if you go home and think, hey, maybe we need a strategy refresh as well. So in our theme on what the government is doing, it would be crazy for us to have missed out regional councils. The job of regional councils will be about tracking change, tracking how farmers are progressing with what they have quite easily committed to. Now they've got to actually do it. It sounds like an onerous job. Chad? I wonder if you could tell us how you're going to achieve it. The other thing I'm also very keen on is to see what you're doing and how it might be able to be used for other things as well, yep, in terms of productivity.
Okay, first of all, what I'll say is you'll see that there was going to be two of us here. Mark had to run off and had a little bit of emergency to deal with this morning and this afternoon. So he was going to take you, Mark is the Land Advisory Services Manager, and he was going to take you through some of the how, from a regional council, how we're going to use the farm plan. My role is more in process and data. So I was going to talk to you about what are we going to do with all the data and what are all those challenges. So the first slide I will cover off for Mark, but I will say that there's some bits that I don't know as much as Mark. So one thing we're very conscious of within the regional council and the wider regional sector is when people say farm plans, they talk about integrated farm planning, they talk about farm plans, farm environment planning, they talk about freshwater farm plans. And it's trying to understand what everybody means when they use those terms and trying to get consistency of people using those terms. Because it's really hard to have those conversations about what data you need when people have a different interpretation of what all of those mean. You know, the way we're looking at it, you know, the integrated farm planning is the more holistic stuff. It's got more of the animal care, health and safety, the people, the biodiversity. Farm environment plans, that's where you get your ecosystem, your greenhouse gas coming into it. And then your freshwater farm plans is really more around those actions, the risks, the mitigations, the timelines for those specific things against the environmental parts. So when I talk about this, that's sort of the hierarchy that we're sort of working to. So that gives you a little bit of context, because if we don't put these out there, everybody takes their little interpretations and everybody then goes, but I thought you meant this when we were meaning something else. What it also means is at each of those stages, the level of detail that we need can be quite different. The level of detail that a farmer needs to show that they are compliant and, say, for a freshwater farm plan can be, and in most cases, very different to what the regional council actually needs. So if we start thinking about some of those, you know, we are working in a very dynamic, confusing, changing space where a lot of the stuff that we're trying to get to is still undefined. And that makes it hard not only on farmers, it makes it hard on the consultants, it makes it hard on software vendors, it makes it hard on ourselves to go, well, what data do we want? What data do we want farmers to capture? What data do we want to get off them? How do we do that? And there is a lot of challenges about getting people to understand to what level of data that when we talk about these things, what level of data that we're actually needing farmers to capture versus what we need versus what MFE, MPI needs. It's also understanding in that how that data is used, how it's aggregated, Where is it aggregated? Because I think that really needs to come from why do we want the data? What is the questions that we're actually really posing, and what is the data we need to follow that all the way through so that we can see if the outcome is what we were expecting. We're also looking at, we know across the whole industry there is lots of data out there. You know, Blair talked about him manually entering into 6 systems. That's 6 different systems holding the same data. We as a regional council, what do we actually need to hold? Because we may not be the ones who need to hold that information. But then you get into the other discussion we were having earlier about if we're not holding the information, who's holding it? How do we get it? What are some of those fundamentals that are stopping us sharing data? Because that's the thing that, you know, where Graham's talking about how do we use this in other bits. We've got some very core fundamental things that we've got to get over to allow us to share data. Because at the moment, trying to share data, everybody knows, is really hard. But in reality, it's not that complex. And Andrew sort of talked about it earlier. From the technology point of view, it isn't actually that hard. From the people and process, it is extremely hard because you start to get into politics, you start to get into the privacy, you start to get into the commercial sensitivity of stuff. And that's where the challenges are. We also have to work out how do we make the freshwater farm plan, the farm environment plan, a living document that isn't just a one-off thing that people do. How do we make it so that it adds value? And how do we, from a regional council point of view, make sure the information we are requesting is something that adds value to a farmer, helps them not just only from their farmer point of view, but their community, you know, the region and nationally. So part of that is also understanding that data that we're collecting, or the data that's being collected out there, how is it actually used? And Linda made mention of it in terms of, from her perspective, in terms of the S-maps, you know, a lot of this is how do we get more of this into a cycle? How do we get the data being collected, turned into information that can then go through a cycle and actually come back and provide new insights, new information for people to use? And in reality, from a regional council point of view, that's our policy cycle. We've got to, we come up with a policy, we've got to get data for it. That data comes through as the outcomes, that feeds back into the policy, feeds back into research, that continues that flow. What you see on here and what I'm trying to illustrate is at different points, there's different levels of data. For in the integrated farm planning space, we're talking about the level of data that is needed there is quite detailed, and it's quite individualised from a reporting level to a farmer. When we move into the community or the regional view, that data starts to become less detailed because it's not about the thing itself, it's about thinking about how many of those we've got, how much of this has been completed. And we need to think about our information being part of that cycle. Now, our problem when we start thinking about that information is, as I said before, how do you share it? For me, we've got 3 fundamental IDs that are lacking across the whole industry. One has actually started to be solved. We as a country, do we have an individual, unique, personal identifier? We don't. So I think I'm not sure where James is sitting. You know, earlier you showed up, you had 6 different programs that you wanted a farmer to give you access to. That's 6 different logins, 6 different passwords that the farmer has to go in and give you permissions for all of them. If you start to think about how could I give permission once? James is part of this group of my farm, he's now got access. Entity, so I've used the word entity rather than business because there are so many different types of operations. Now, Andrew mentioned it earlier, QR codes. QR codes are linked to an NZBN number. We now actually have a number that can identify every type of business in New Zealand, where go back 2 years, we didn't have it. So how do we use that? How do we use that to share information? Think about every time, regional council do it, all the businesses do it. Tell us all your business details. Wouldn't it be great if I could just give you a number and then that business could go and find it? The same thing with a farm. What is the definition of farm? What is the spatial? I think it was either Fraser or Blair talking about, how many different maps I had. Wouldn't it be great if I could have one map that I could share and I knew that was the source of the truth? So things we're working on in the regional council is how do we do this in relation to freshwater farm plants? I'm also working on a more pan-sector initiative, because once you've got these, you've got to link it to how do you get all the data definitions to support it. And so that's the link 25. So the last bits I just want to leave you with is farm plans can provide some of that data. So we don't need all of that data, but some of the farmers, you'll need that data to be able to tell that story. We're moving down the digital transformation journey. That's talking about who's got the source of the data and how do we start actually transferring it electronically and digitally, not making Blair go into his office, into his dark room and do it. Once we get, the benefits, then you've got that consistent source of the data. You can share it within your farm partners, along your supply chain. Somebody mentioned about, how people want to know it all along the supply chain. And then, to government and regulators. And this is sort of a personal one for me, compliance shouldn't be something that is a separate event. It should just be the combination of all of the stuff that you're doing and the data is available. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm a bit nervous about announcing that.
So I guess, stand in front of the microphone, just a few reflections on the day, and I'll keep this brief. So the first thing I thought about was the messages from our practitioners in the morning sessions. So the people, the farmers and the people who are working closely with farmers. And they talked about, unashamedly stolen from your slides, folks, people, planet, performance, and I've just kind of expanded those out a bit more. We talked about the importance of people, and I think we've reflected on that during the day. There were questions about what's stopping data interoperability, and the answer was people. There were questions about how do we get adoption. We talked about the need for specialists, and so a lot of it comes back to the importance of people in our thinking. Mathematical equations are great, but people are very important. Planet, we've talked about the need to make sure that we're farming within the constraints that we've got and doing the right things for our land and our planet. Performance, and I've added, and productivity there, and Martin's questions are good ones. We want to include, we know we often fall into talking about improving production, right? And we know we don't want to talk about improving production, we want to talk about improving productivity. The measure of what we're getting out, and the bottom line measure of that is profit, as long as the other factors are equal for the amount of inputs put in and for the amount of emissions going out. Then something that I got out of those farmers who talked this morning is their strong emphasis on planning, on the processes that they and their teams follow, the communication of those processes, and the precision with which they go and measure. They identify what are the important things for them to measure in their systems, and they go and measure them. And together that, that was talked about as systematisation, turning things into a system that's repeatable, and I think that's key. So some great learnings for me in those areas today. We talked, for those who are involved in research and in governance, we talked about capabilities. And I guess my reflection, thinking about some of the presentations, was the amount of amazing capability that we've had leveraged in this sector over many years in our science R&D and all of the things that underpin that. Some fantastic capability. And I think that goes to the heart of what you were talking about before, Graham. Other countries are investing in their core competencies, and in New Zealand we've made a lot of investment, not enough, but a lot of investment in building capability in pastoral agriculture and its underpinnings, which has been fantastic. There's some really valuable collections. We talked about the virtual climate stations, we talked about S-maps, and we've talked about some of the other collections that are out there. I didn't want to just say databases because there's a lot more than just databases. Almost every speaker talked about the opportunity to collaborate further, to engage further, to use data from other sources, whether that's climate stations or soils data or any of the other data sets that are potential to use, and the opportunity to engage together. And we see that in some of the collaborative projects that have been done. We talked a little bit about data integration, and to me there's some real benefits in being able to link data and to have common identifiers and all of those necessary things that make it easier to connect the dots between systems, and also consistency in meaning and interpretation, and are we talking about the same things? And then this afternoon we talked about our, and you know, I'm playing some fun games here, but we talked a little bit about sensing. We started off by talking from space, which is very much built on sensing technologies. But I thought, particularly when I was listening to Dean as well, that's another great example of sourcing data so that farmers aren't having to go and measure it. You know, imagine if you as a farmer, and farmers did have to do this, some still do, go and attend every sale yard that they can so that they know what the prices are. Try and keep their own little book so that they know, you know, where prices are heading. But there are tools that can deliver that data just as space can deliver pasture cover data. And I think we saw through the work that Ravensdown and Balance are doing a bunch of other sensing and use of predictive tools to take some of the effort that farmers would have out of sort of capturing data and making sense of it. A lot of the tools we looked at, including FarmMax and including the tools that Ravensdown and Balance have been working on, have been around making predictions that help people make either recommendations or decisions, and that's really powerful. And I think there's been some, again, a thread of discussion going through around, well, how do we then extend those services out? If you've got other crops you want to measure with space, how do you do that? Can we extend those services? If you've got some data that's in FarmMax or one of these other tools, how do we make it available? How do we make data flow into FarmMax? I think my other observation is that we're still at the stage where many of these tools, maybe space being an exception here, require the assistance of somebody, a specialist, to help interpret them, right? Whether that's a rep or an agri-manager in a fertiliser company, and we know there's good reasons why we should be doing that, or a consultant to help you with FarmMax. And I'm not saying, you know, we know those roles are essential and important, but if we're to move to support for adoption and use, we need to think about how we kind of leverage the time of those people, right? So that they're doing the things that only they can do, and that our tools and our systems are easier to use so that specialists don't have to get involved at every step in the way. So I guess that's my kind of reflections on what we've talked about today. I hope that, like me, this has been of interest to you, that you've had your eyes opened to some interesting things that people have been doing and some opportunities. I think it's been great to have the input from the farmers and the practitioners to kind of ground truth what the problems are that we're trying to solve. And what we're hoping is that this conversation continues on. So if you're on Zoom or if you're here in the room, hopefully you've made some contacts or you've made some notes of people you should talk to, and we'd really encourage you to continue to do that. If there's any way that Rezare can facilitate those discussions for you, we're happy to do that as well. So thank you very much.